and take the production.
And to that conversation I promised you earlier, today we're going to be inspired by one little gentleman's story and how he became a reformed convict, should I say, and how he's gotten back into society. Of course, very closer to me, it is himself, John Njoroge. He is a reformed convict. Next to John, it is Agatha Mwangi. She is a social worker. And on my far left, I have Susan Gitao, a counseling psychologist, and advocate Kefo Ojijo, who are with us here in studio. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to have you here. Let me begin with John. John, I want you to take the audience through your story. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay. My story started, we're back in the villages when my grandmother died, who used to take care of me. That's the time I was introduced to some crime. And I would pick here and pick there. But this is coming into conflict with the law. And so they had to follow me up. And I was arrested together with my colleagues who are doing this with. And this happened in a certain manner that now we had started by dropping out of school. And this followed by taking drugs and so on. And this was just a way of trying to survive from whatever we were doing, because now our parents had neglected us.
How old were you?
By that time, I was 16 years old when I was arrested. And I was taken to juvenile remand. And I stayed there for around 1 week and then attempted escape. After attempting escape, that's when I was taken, another case was opened for me. And that case put me into a youth correctional center in Nairobi. That's where I spent my 4 months term, after which I was released. The other case had put me on probation for 3 years. It was completed the other day in April 17 this year. Yeah.
All right, and where are your friends?
My friends are back at home.
They're also back at home.
Yeah.
All right, Susan, it's also good to have you here. I loved what John said. He didn't want to do this. It's because of the circumstances that he found himself in. Just demystify for us what it is that drives young people at such a young age, 16, 15. These are people who should be in school, chasing their academics and so forth. What is it that drives young people at such a young age to find themselves in juvenile courts?
Thank you, Zinzi. What I want to say, especially by quote John's case, majority of them do this because of poverty circumstances. You've heard what he's talked about, his background, and that is where you'll find most of them. You'll find them in correctional institutions. They come in from informal settlements. Actually, we could say 90+% of the youths you'll find in correctional facilities, they are from poor backgrounds. We also do have peer pressure, because as they are growing up, they believe more in their peers than maybe senior people. We also have the issue of drugs, because if you're under the influence of drugs, then you have this peer pressure. You might find yourself committing crime. We also have issues on parenting. There's some parents that neglect their children. So every other person out there can be their teacher, can be their parent. And I also want to a little bit blame the school system, because if a teacher doesn't know a child like John in school, why is John late? Why is John stealing from other kids? Why is he taking books from other children? If you don't want to follow and know this kind of a child, they will continue doing what they are doing, and finally, like he says, he didn't know whatever he was doing was wrong until he learned, because the law got hold of him. We also have issues of maybe our policies. If you look at the country today, we have 3 Bosto institutions for the underage offenders like him, 2 for boys, and only 1 for girls that was started most recently in 2016 here in Nairobi. You realize even the government system is failing to some extent, though their efforts, I want to say their efforts, because such like, I thank God because he went to a youth center within the correctional facilities, and then he was helped to rethink his life, and he went back to school, completed, and now he's pursuing his degree. So, but it's because somebody somewhere held his hands. I also want to blame the community. Why would you see a child like John who was being taken care of by his grandmother, and you're not thinking as a neighbor, that could be my child?
Well, okay, John, your grandmother takes care of you?
She used to take care of me, but she passed away 2013.
And your parents?
My mom is still there, but she takes care of me right now. Back then, she used to do some hustles for me and for my brother. By that time, when she was out, that's when my grandmother was taking care of me.
When Mom heard that you've been found stealing, what was her first reaction?
Her first reaction, she was very startled with it. And she was wondering why I had to do this. But later on, that's when she came to understand that the situation had forced me to do this.
Kefa Ojiji is an advocate, and Kefa, I'm so glad that you're here to help us understand the legality of all of this. Susan, as a psychologist, has said that a lot of this is, we have to put the blame on society, on the schools, if young people between the ages of 15, 16, even younger, find themselves doing activities that they do not want to do out of the necessity of having to survive. But then again, the law also does not work in their favor. Let us begin from a bit of an understanding. Once a young person underage is caught and they're taken to juvenile court, where does that process start? Are they also allowed to have a lawyer? Does the government pay for that lawyer?
Thank you very much. The reality is, okay, fine. The spirit of criminal law in aspect, if you see at the drafting of all the criminal statutes, is majorly for three functions. One is to retribute, which is to punish. The second is to deter, which the thought of the punitive measures is supposed just to scare you so that you don't do the act. And the third, which you don't even care much, is to restore. You see, and you find that because of the historical nature that we've had right from the 1945, when the bourgeois or the white settlers imported the criminal law from the Indian and then brought it to Kenya, the system of restoration nobody has ever cared much about. So that our legal system that deals with criminal is mainly punitive in nature, and they don't care about the aftermath, what happens to the convicts, you see. So just like the normal process of the criminal procedure, even the juveniles and the same procedure applies to all of them. You find young people, you will find that unless, if you look at Article 49, unless it is so compelling that the nature of offense is likely, the accused is likely to suffer, irreparable justice system, the government may assign a lawyer for them. But in most cases, you find that the children, their parents will still look for advocates to stand in for the children.
Right.
You see, because the government, the process, and people also feel that even lawyers who are coming to do pro bono will not do a serious job, value for money. So that even the parents will now have to step out and look for an advocate and pay us to represent their children. The process continues. Now, the law does not care whether you are a minor or you are, an adult, you see. The penal code and this, the repercussions or the sentencing is the same. You see, the only process is where they're kept. That is what is make different, where they're kept, and how their proceedings are conducted in court. The proceedings of minors may not necessarily be conducted with strict measure to that of the adult, but the aftermath is the same. You're found guilty, you go to prison. The maximum is there. However, the judge has the discretion to maybe be lenient a bit for the young people. My only concern will be, and what I think we need to relook in our criminal system, is that it is now high time that we started thinking like other countries like Canada. When we go to Canada, for instance, when convicts have undergone through, maybe the prison process and they're done, when they come out, the government is the first institution to initiate a process to help them recover, their life, by starting to absorb them in their own project, give them a probation period, they pick up, and then absorb them in society. In Kenya, it will be hard because our system does not care about that. Once you're convicted, it goes on record. It is a public document. So that even when you move to, acquire employment anywhere, when they ask for your record, it's even hard for you even to get clearance, the good conduct clearance from the CIDs and whatever. So it is the fact you are convicted already has, staggered your life in a way, so that moving on for you and other people becomes a hard life.
John, Susan said that you're in school. Was it difficult for you to get back to school, especially now that that was on your papers, the fact that you had gone to juvenile courts?
Yeah, it was very hard, especially when now it came for, my mom, after I was convicted, she wasn't ready to pay for me the school fees. The problem came when now I had the will to go back to school, but she had no power to do it. Now I was looking for, or I was trying to find a way in which now I can get back to school through some sponsorship or so. For the school, the idea was that when I was going back to school, the idea that I was once convicted was hidden.
All right.
Yeah.
It was hidden in what sense?
It was hidden in such a manner that the information that was given to the school was not part of the sense that I was once convicted was not given to the school that I was to report.
All right, Agatha Bwagi is a social worker. Agatha, help us understand how do you guys deal with underage defenders?
So normally the UK youth justice system finds any other alternative, and juvenile is the last option. So what happens is we always look at the development of this child. We look at the stages. As a social worker, we've got to liaise with them, and we see this child is still developing, therefore their personality is still changing, therefore they're more prone to act impulsively, they're more prone to have immature judgment and lesser self-control. We also look at the attachment. What is the attachment with the familiarity with the families, with the friends? Is it secure? Is it insecure? Is it complex attachment? And before we get to base this, whether this child should go ahead into the system, we try and look for other interventions. We can come in and see, okay, this child, for instance, is a sex worker. So what does this mean? It means we might as well look at what can we do to help her before, or help him before we get them into the system. We can give them anti-behavioral orders. This is whereby we restrict them to certain areas. You're not allowed to go to certain areas. You're not allowed to walk around with a certain group of people. If that does not work, then we go ahead and involve community sentences, community probations and patrols to ensure that this child is well catered for, because we are trying to avoid bringing this young girl, young man with full of life. We're trying to avoid getting them into that system whereby when we might not be too sure if they will be reformed, or they might come out as more difficult people within the society.
I'm glad that you say that before it even gets to juvenile, that there are other alternatives. What are some of those alternatives?
I will use a case study in the UK. Last year's statistics, there were about 4.7 million recorded crimes. However, only 74,000 went ahead and got arrested. You find that the rest, they were trying to look for solutions, getting them into training, getting them involved, getting the family involved as well. For instance, if it's a child who, suppose, stabbed a family member because of domestic abuse, you find that the parents will get involved as well. We will try to understand how did it get to that? How did it get to the point where the child had to use force to be able to get people to understand them? So we try and bring in trainings. If it's drug, we bring in drug rehabilitation before we now get to that extent where they have to get to prisons.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, more with John, Agatha, Susan, and of course, Kefa when we come back from this short commercial break. Stay with us.